Chris Duane is considered by many to be the most vocal silver bull alive. He has gone on the air talking about silver prices hitting even $900 when the dollar collapses. With rising interest rates, tax cuts, and mounting obligations, there's no doubt that the federal deficit will continue to be outrageous for decades. With many of the Democrat states hating on Trump, political instability might trigger a precious metals bull market. Go to portfoliowealthglobal.com/bonds to learn about the greatest threat to your prosperity now.
Welcome to the Industry Experts Panel at PortfolioWealthGlobal.com. My name is Michelle Holliday. Today we are welcoming a returning guest and one of the most popular guests within the YouTube precious metals community, Mr. Chris Duane. Chris is the man behind the video series, The Greatest Truth Never Told, and someone who really needs no introduction. Chris is a huge silver bull and probably one of the biggest on the planet. Chris, welcome to the show. How are you today?
Good. It stunned me that I'm probably the biggest on the planet. I'm probably the only one left on the planet.
Which is a possibility at this point. Chris, we want to start off this show. We want to talk about the fact that 2018's best performing asset has been the US dollar, which is highly unusual. What do you think about what is happening right now?
I think it can best be explained by John Exter, who's a former, not the head of the Federal Reserve, but he was a former Federal Reserve banker that created Exter's pyramid of liquidity. And basically it would show all the different asset classes in a sort of a pyramid. And at the base of it was, or at the top of it is the most illiquid and largest markets. So that would tend to be like the derivatives and the debt market and the real estate market and stocks and stuff. And then as you would go down, you're getting into a smaller pool, but it would be more liquid, in terms of being able to, find price discovery and stuff like that. So now you're getting down into the stocks and stuff like that. And then eventually it gets into cash. And then at the very tip of it is gold. And at the very tip of that is silver. So I think what is happening is that since there's a lot of economic uncertainty that's going on around the world and that we're coming out of an 8-year market of lowering interest rates and now raising interest rates in the face of, this global, economy. There's a lot of people who are forced to take on dollars mainly because their own currencies are starting to fail. So if you look at like Venezuela, Iran, Turkey, Argentina is having problems right now. You're going to see a lot of people who are, going to get into more safe and liquid assets, which the US dollar among all the fiat assets or currencies out there would represent the safest and most liquid. That doesn't mean it's the best. I think this is just inevitable that what will end up happening is as the global economy continues to hemorrhage under the rising rate environment, that's going to add more pressure to it, that there's going to be even more pressure to get into more safe and liquid assets. And that's where I think precious metals are really going to come in. So when people really start fearing the purchasing power of the dollars, which is what we have with inflation, or the stocks having too much risk. We saw in the 2008 financial collapse, even the banks that we normally would rely upon are even become, unsafe, and people want to have more liquid and more safe assets. And that's where I think gold and silver in particular provide the historic, without question, best place to be in times of uncertainty.
Turning now to your favorite topic, which of course is silver. What is the catalyst which will attract buyers to more silver? Historically, investors have turned to silver only when other assets and their cash flows were failing, like a bear market or a sideways market or government printing. And right now, we have a global QT, a quantitative tightening. How is this bullish for silver, or is it?
I think there's a couple factors that lead to my investment in physical silver. Number one, I think it is without question probably the only asset not in a bull market. So if you look across all the asset categories you have, they're near generational highs. The stock market, every time I look at it, I'm like, God, I remember when the stocks were, 10,000 was a big deal. Now it's 26,000. You look at the bond markets across the world, the real estate markets, the art market, the luxury car market, like all these things are just at astronomical levels, mind-boggling numbers. And yet silver languishes at the bottom of a 7-year bear market that has been, going on. So that was my number one draw into silver back in 2005 when I got out of the housing bubble at the top in New Jersey and literally bet the house on physical silver in 2005 when silver was at $7. And now that silver is at $14, all these years later, I try to tell people they used to think I was a genius for getting out of the housing bubble and into silver at 7 to watch it go up to 50. But I would try to tell people that silver at $14 is the exact same thing as silver at $7 because there's double the amount of global debt out there from the time period that I invested in. So the money supply has doubled. So of course, the natural inflation is going to make it. So if you thought buying $7 silver in 2005 was a pretty smart move, I'm saying that buying $14 silver now in 2018 is even a more important move because this next financial crisis is not going to be like the 2008 financial crisis, which was an institutional crisis of a few bad banks making a few bad bets on a few bad housing markets and, dumping it on a few pensions. This next time, nothing got fixed in 2008. All those bad debts, bad actors, they all continue to go along. The taxpayers bailed it out. The central banks bought all these, illiquid, worthless assets for 100 cents on the dollar and re-liquefied the banks, and nothing got fixed. So this next time around, it's not going to be a few institutions. We're not worried about, AIG's, Freddie Mac, Fannie Mae's, GE Capital anymore. Now it's nations. You got Venezuela, Argentina, Iran, perhaps the euro. If you look at the debt to GDP ratio of even Japan, China's quadrupled their debt since 2008. Like major problems are going out there. And I think people are totally not taking enough factor that when things go bad this next time, it's going to be huge and that there will be a rush into the safest, most liquid forms of assets. And you're going to find, particularly with silver, being such a teeny tiny market. I mean, I think the market cap of all the silver above ground is only $16 billion. There's not even companies on pink sheets on the Toronto Stock Exchange that have, that little of a market cap, much less, the $1 trillion market caps of, Amazon and Apple now. So there'll be very few safe exit doors for people to go into. And I tried it. And that's why I'm working as hard as I can now in the bear market, because by the time silver gets over 50 and 100 and $1,000, it'll be too late. And I won't even need to even talk about silver by then. This is the time that investors need to look at the grand scope of things, realize that this cannot go on forever. And the next time that it goes bad, I'm not so sure that they're going to be able to pull it out like they did in 2008.
What is your prediction on when silver could really take off?
I gave up on that. I thought the world was going to end May of 2008. So I sold my house at the top of the housing bubble in 2005. I spent the next 3 years trying to educate my parents, friends, anybody who would listen. I'm like, this is not going to end well. And everybody's like, no, the housing market's strong. The American economy's strong. And I'm like, this doesn't end well. We have too much debt out there with people buying stuff that we don't need. And, there's got to be some gravity. And of course, I left in May of 2008. I literally walked away from a family business of millions of dollars because I realized that the millions of dollars that I'm walking away from in assets would turn to liabilities as soon as the market turned. And literally, 3 months after I left, that's when the financial crisis happened. And all those assets that were worth millions now not only became worth a lot less, they also became illiquid. You couldn't even sell them even if you wanted to because there simply wasn't credit out there. And now here we are. Everybody thinks that we've recovered, and yet all we've had this false recovery of this extraordinarily low interest rates that have happened for far too long. And people have taken out more debt and bought more stuff that we don't need in the massive malinvestment, and nothing changed. Whatever you felt in 2008, you're going to feel magnitudes worse this next time around. So I'd rather be positioned for the single largest transfer of wealth, I think, from this intangible, debt-based, fiat Ponzi, global illusion of wealth that we have go out there into real things. And there's very few real things that you can invest in, that provide as much safety and security and liquidity and less counterparty risk as silver.
Chris, on a personal note, when exactly did your fascination with silver originate? Investors who focus on silver, as you mentioned, are actually a very small community. Can you please share with us how this came about for you? You've touched on it here and there, but I'd love to hear the full story.
I think the full story came from when I realized I was a millionaire at 30 years old and wondered why everybody else wasn't a millionaire. I realized that I didn't know really enough about what money was. And the more I looked into it, I realized that we have an incredibly rigged system that I think is unfair for the average person because they're not educated enough on it. When you realize that our money in itself is debt, like when debt is created, that's when money was created. And that was one thing that blew my mind. I always thought like, oh, the government printed off receipts and, that they had gold or silver behind it. You kind of just think that. And here I was, a millionaire, and I really didn't even know what the difference between currency and money was. I didn't realize, that we had a privately held Federal Reserve that, it wasn't even the government that was printing these off. They were Federal Reserve notes, and that these notes were debt. And then I looked in my business and I realized I was creating millions of dollars worth of debt every week, every month. And I was the beneficiary of it. And those people that create debt are the ones that profit off of this debt and death paradigm. And that totally changed my view. I started to learn about the Federal Reserve. I started learning about, how hot money works and all this other stuff. And I realized like this game is totally rigged. It's to get people into further debt. And the people that sell the debt and own the debt, they're the ones that are profiting off of it. So I looked at, that debt bubbles are ultimately unsustainable and that they always have these crashes. And it's a direct correlation to the Federal Reserve raising interest rates, which is what's going on right now. The Federal Reserve is raising interest rates. And if you want 100% correlation to when recessions happen, it's when the Fed raises it one too many times and boom, everything starts to go. So when the interest rates are lowering or flat, like we've had for, since the 2008 financial crisis, it's pretty much let's blow up every single asset class out there because there's a lot of free money floating around. But once it starts tightening, that's when those markets and liquidity and risk start coming back. And that's when everybody's going to get all upset again. And I'm telling people to get into physical silver now before that happens, because the price of silver is going to go up dramatically. And my own personal experience, securing it, storing it, preparing for it. It's not like, going onto your brokerage account and clicking a few digits and, you think that you're safe. It takes time and energy and I think a lot of discipline to stack silver.
Could you go through that process with us, just for people who don't keep physical precious metals? What is entailed in preparation?
Well, I think first of all, you have to realize that there's many different forms of silver out there. So when I first came into buying silver, I bought 100-ounce bars. I was like, oh, I want the most amount of silver for the least amount of price. And I bought these 100-ounce bars, and went down to the COMEX vaults and, picked them up eventually. And there's a lot of factors, like people can store them in vaults. People can, one thing I don't recommend is storing it in a bank and your house. Like there's two places that you don't want to do. One, you don't want to have people robbing you. And number two, you don't want a bank, saying, oh, you can't have access to it. So it takes time to secure it, find, locations, whether personally or institutionally, to store your money. There's different forms. Most people typically do what I did and buy, bars and, the cheap silver, and then they graduate up to the government mints, and buy like Eagles and Maple Leafs because they think they're popular and very liquid. And it took time for me to realize that there was far better values in silver where you could pay, pretty much the exact same premium that you would with a government mint, but get designs that were in much lower mintage, much higher demand, and, go up in value more than the price of silver actually does. And that's what I've been doing for the last 6 years now, and designing my own physical silver that comes out on a weekly basis and comes out with all sorts of new designs and stuff. And I think it's the best value on the market. But, it does take time for, the typical person who's been indoctrinated into thinking, digits in the bank are somehow wealth, or digits on your brokerage account. Because I used to be that way. I used to be that guy goes, oh, I got, 6 digits in my brokerage account. That's more, that I'm going to be able to, than I need. And then to turn it into physical wealth, it's a whole different process, and one in which it does take time. And that's why I think a lot of people end up starting off with, the bigger bars and maybe even gold to get out of the system and at least have something physical. But, as I've gone through this, I know for a fact there's better ways of investing in silver that they call them semi-numismatic. that they actually, the collector's value of each particular coin actually goes up more than the physical silver. And that's been just a game changer for me in my stacking.
That's really interesting because I think a lot of people, when they think about, oh, I'm going to get silver in the future, I'm going to get gold in the future, they don't take into consideration the preparation time that it actually entails.
And that's what I think fascinates me about this, because throughout all of human history, that was the only way of measuring wealth. Like, you measured wealth in ounces, not, future promises on wealth. That was another big mind-blowing thing that when I learned about our financial system, is that, our dollars, they're not real wealth itself. Like, they're literally worthless until you exchange it for labor and goods. So it's not real wealth itself, but it's a future promise on wealth. And I've used this clip, I don't know, hundreds of times on my YouTube channel, The Greatest Truth Never Told, of Alan Greenspan giving congressional testimony of a congressman saying, hey, can we continue to afford Social Security and all this stuff? And Alan Greenspan, who is, kind of the quintessential central banker of the time, said, yes, we can promise any amount of money that you want, but the one thing we cannot guarantee is the purchasing power of that money. And that's when I was like, God, they can print trillions of dollars, destroy the value of all these currencies overnight. There's nothing stopping them. And that's when I realized that my wealth is, so long as it's a digit on a screen, literally is a liability, because until I transfer it into something real, like ounces of silver or gold or something like that, it's at risk. The purchasing power of it is at risk, because we live in a system where these bankers and governments can print any amount of money. And now you have a president in power who's, adding on, I think I just read an article, this year, they're adding $1.3 trillion of new debt on top of, the 21 trillion or 22 trillion that we already have. And that this is during an economy that works. What happens when we have the equivalent of 2008 financial crisis, or even what I feel magnitudes worse, where the economy crashes even more, the tax receipts crash even more, and they still have all this spending that they're putting out there? What are the deficits going to be then? What kind of monetary stimulus are they going to put in? I mean, whatever it is, it's got to be magnitudes more than what they did in 2008. And they doubled the global money supply from 2008 till now. Like, what's going to happen then? It's guaranteed to destroy the value of all paper assets. And that's where I think silver is really going to shine.
That leads me to the next question. I was just going to ask about your perspective on Trumponomics. What do you think about the impact that President Trump's policies are having upon the U.S. economy right now?
Well, you have to realize that this is a man that made money off of debt. He is a man that made money on real estate and gambling and all these business enterprises, and he loves debt. He loves cheap money, because as one of these guys that benefit off of debt, he creates the debt, but he's not the one that actually ever pays it. He's got assets that pay for it. So I know what he's doing. He's doing what I think he thinks is the best, by juicing the economy, by putting more debt money into the system to stimulate it, and the economy feels better because there's more, drug money that's going through the economy. Like alcoholics continue to drink, so that they never get the hangover. And that's what we're having. We're having this one last hurrah of free drunk money that's flowing into the economy. And what's working against him is that the Federal Reserve is raising interest rates on that. So they're saying, hey, yeah, go ahead, throw as much money on the table as you want, but we're going to make it cost more going forward. So here we are accruing more debt that we'll never be able to pay off, that will eventually be paid off in either one of two things: higher taxes on future generations, or higher inflation on everybody's assets, which I think is the most likely scenario. And it's a death wish. I mean, this is not going to end well. You cannot continue to add on debt and then not expect that there's going to be a huge payback. And whether it happens this year, next year, or 10 years from now, I don't know. But I do know that I don't want to be around one day after it all goes bad and not be in the right asset class.
Shifting gears just a little bit, Chris, do you believe that the price of gold or silver has a deep correlation with China's rise to the top of the global economy in terms of GDP, the gross domestic product size, in the coming years?
I don't think China wants the price of gold or silver to rise, even though they are the largest miners of gold and also the largest consumers of gold. They, I think, are playing this currency war very smartly by, realizing that our best weapon as the United States is the dollar, and the best weapon China would have would be to stack cheap gold, because at some point the dollar is not going to have the purchasing power. And then what is going to be the basis for the next financial paradigm? And I think gold and silver, mostly gold on the international level, is going to be a basis for whatever the next financial paradigm comes. So you have to realize after World War II, the world was broke. It broke on World War II debt. The industrial base of all the major nations were destroyed except for the United States. And even then, the United States dollar was as good as gold back then. At least on an international currency basis, not necessarily for the domestic people. And we've gone through multiple phases of where this dollar has been devalued. We know that Nixon closed the gold window in, I think, 1971, where all these countries kind of got wise to our guns and butter spending, deficit spending that we were doing back then, and realized that we didn't have all the gold that we said we had for all these dollars that were floating around. So these countries were like, yeah, well, I'm going to take these dollars and I'm going to take gold instead. And that's when Nixon, closed the gold window. And then after that, they needed to have some sort of basis for, underlying support of the dollar. And that's when Henry Kissinger concocted the petrodollar. And that's essentially what's been running the basis of the dollar's power for so long, so that even nations that hated us, they needed to own dollars to get oil from these OPEC nations in the United States. That was the only currency that they accepted. Now that's starting to break with China. They have created a petro yuan standard, which is still relatively very small compared to the petrodollar standard. But the one key factor that they're also doing in that petro yuan standard is that those contracts are also convertible into gold. And I think that basically is laying down the foundation of whatever the next world order is going to be, of having real assets behind these paper promises. And I think once we have a global generational debt-based fiat Ponzi collapse, that we will have some sort of semblance, at least on an international level, of returning to real assets, real wealth, whether it's oil or gold or whatnot, behind these currencies that are flying out there. I'm sure over time that the bankers are going to, devalue them and do all the same stuff that they did, over time with us. But I think any reset of whatever the system is, and that's where my investment in silver is only focused on. I'm not focused on making percentage gains here and there and trying to outpace stock market. No, I'm concerned about making my wealth through the single largest and probably most traumatic transforming event in human history, from this economic paradigm into whatever the next one is. And I would think that whatever the next one is going to be based on some real wealth. And I know silver is going to play a part of that.
That's a really interesting point too, Chris, that all of these contracts, the new ones, can be based in gold as an alternative, because the petrodollar, really, as ingenious as it was to keep the United States
diabolical.
Diabolical, that's another term for it.
Yeah, I think it's diabolical.
Right? And now that it's falling apart, it's going to be such a huge shift. It's rather frightening in a way.
Yeah, I mean, because you consider our 70% of our economy is based off of consumerism. So what do? We have cars, we have strip malls, we have highways, we have this massive investment into an oil-backed economy. And if we no longer have the ability of claiming global dominance over the oil market or certainly the currency, our own way of life is going to change. We already have consumed way more generationally than we have any right to. And we're passing along huge debts at younger ages. I mean, it's mind-boggling to me that our youngest kids have $1.5 trillion of debt, student loan debt, that it will never be, they can never get rid of it in bankruptcy, and that they're more in debt at an earlier age. And now they can't find jobs to even pay the interest back on those. They are putting off getting married, having kids, buying homes, and doing all the typical things that would normally boost up the economy. And when all that ends, what does the economy look like? I'm scared to think what 70% of the consumer economy looks like when, we have oil, war, high interest rates, collapsing currency. I mean, things get very bad very quickly. And that's what makes me want to have more silver earlier on at cheaper prices than waiting until it becomes obvious that something really bad is going to happen and then trying to scramble and figuring out while everybody else is. I'd rather be, my saying on my channel is, I'd rather be 12 years too early than one day too late.
Now, Chris, just playing devil's advocate here. How do
Mm-hmm.
you hedge your bets just in case the $900 silver price prediction or any triple-digit price prediction does not transpire?
Oh, there's no hedging for me.
Okay.
I've been 100% involved in silver since 2005. I'm not, I have business, I have ways of making money, but as far as saving, silver is money. That's why I use currency. I use my income to, consume and spend just like everybody else. I have bills too, but when it comes to my investment, what I'm doing, I'm really just saving money. That's all I'm doing is saving silver is my form of money. So when I need money, I can sell my silver. It's the most liquid asset on earth. I mean, think about this. Can you take any other asset, currency, stock, bond, or anything throughout all time in history and all civilizations and still be able to convert it into something of value? You can't even use the dollar in many, places in the world today, much less throughout time. And yet silver has an historic role as money throughout all of human history and all societies. They've used it. And that's what I think is the most powerful thing. And I'd rather be into something and saving something, with zero risk, and waiting for what I feel is going to happen with this global generational debt-based fiat Ponzi collapsing and being, right and sitting tight and just waiting, because it's going to happen. When and where, I don't know. But this does not end well. And 2008 was just a little bit of a taste of how bad things can get.
Now, Chris, many highly acclaimed best-selling authors, such as Harry Dent, believe that the price of silver will actually go down by 30 to 40% from where it is today. What is your commentary on those predictions? What say you?
Harvey likes to write these books about inflation and deflation. And, if you look back at all of the covers of his books, go on Amazon, I mean, the guy changes his mind every 5 years and hops on whatever bandwagon that's out there. I think it's insane to me for anybody to think that the price of silver in the long term is going to go down when it is a depleting asset, one in which the United States Geological Survey says on their own site that Mexico, which is the world's largest exporter of silver, only has an estimated 5 years worth of silver left in its ground, that the global debt crisis that is going on and that the global debt has doubled since 2008, is somehow going to ever get paid back or lower. And, that, things are going to continue to get better, on the global economy scale. I think it's insane. But, my other thing that I say on my channel, listen to all and follow none. I walk my talk. I've been at this, since 2005, publicly since 2010. And I think it's the best place to be. I like being in an asset that nobody wants, because those usually are where the best buys are. When you get, these things that everybody's, jumping on, like you saw with the cryptos earlier this year, that's when you have to take pause and say, maybe I don't want to be involved in this.
Chris, talk to me about JP Morgan and what's going on.
So this is a huge storyline that I think is underlying, the silver story in general. Most people don't realize that Bear Stearns went broke, not because of the financial crisis, but because they were short physical silver. The price of silver had risen from $7 to $21 during a time period where Bear Stearns was short paper silver, and they had exponential losses. So every time the price of silver went up $1, they may have had, hundreds of millions of dollars worth of losses on the books because the trade was going against them. So that was March of 2008, I think March 17th, because I think it was St. Patrick's Day when this all went down, and I saw silver was going up. I mean, it had gone up 300% in the few years that I had it. And the same day that silver hit its peak at $21, the Bear Stearns went broke. And JP Morgan came in and brokered a deal through the Federal Reserve, this privately owned Federal Reserve, to buy Bear Stearns for $2 a share. Now, Bear Stearns had been this legendary long-term bank that was probably trading at $50, $60, $70, a few months ago. And now JP Morgan gets to go in and buy all the Bear Stearns for $2 a share. I mean, what a deal, right? So in that deal, JP Morgan then takes over Bear Stearns' silver short position. And you saw over the next few months, the price of silver collapse from $21 down to $8. And that was a huge, rock, because I was, invested in silver. I was liking $21 silver because it was worth more, I guess. And then it crashed, and I was like, this doesn't make sense. Nothing fundamentally has changed. Why would silver lose half of its value? Why did it go up twice as much? So I realized that somewhere along the line that there was a huge interest in the paper silver market, not the physical market. So people think like, oh, I'm going to buy physical silver and that's going to change no, the paper silver market is controlled by a few banks. And there's an article that I had in, I think, the Financial Times that quantified that you have to realize all the silver that's mined every year is only a few billion, maybe tens of billions of dollars, maybe 10, 12, 13 billion dollars. Yet this Financial Times or Bloomberg article said that the total notional value of all the silver traded in paper was $5 trillion. And I was like, that's a mind-blowing number on a $14 billion annually mined market. Like that can't be right.
It's impossible.
It is. And I even did videos talking about how it's not even 5 trillion because there was so much spoofing that they would do that they don't even conduct these trades. They just, the computer algorithms say that there's a trade coming in and then they just react off of it. I mean, it's a completely insane warped of reality system, that's controlling the paper price of this. So, I learned about that and I go, okay, this is what I'm up against. And then I think JP Morgan actually closed their proprietary desk on silver trading as silver was going up. And that's when you saw the march up from $8 up to $50. And it was May 1st of 2011, I think, that it hit the $50 mark. And it was the same day that supposedly, Saddam or Osama bin Laden was killed and all these markets were closed. And they collapsed the price of silver down from 50 down to, I think, $35 within like a few days. And ever since that point, and this is all during a period where there was, this growing fervor among silver stackers of crash JP Morgan, buy silver. The rallying call was that JP Morgan was short paper silver, just like Bear Stearns was. And if we bought up enough physical silver, we would force the price up and bankrupt JP Morgan. And we did. We drove the price up and went up to $50. And at some point, the JP Morgan and I'm sure all these other banks came in, crashed the paper price of silver down. And we've been in a bear market ever since then. So what is that, 7 years now? Well, one part of the story that most people don't get is that I think the very next month, JP Morgan, which never had a COMEX vault ever, opened up their own silver COMEX vault. And guess what? They started stacking physical silver. So as the price of silver, paper price of silver dropped, these guys then went in and started stacking physical silver, much in the same way that all the silver stackers had, except now that the good guys, let's call it, the silver stackers out here, are now despondent because the price of silver is collapsing and we're in this languishing bear market and poor us. Well, I tell you what, there's one group of guys that are loving this, and it's called JP Morgan. They now own, I think, 71% of all the eligible silver on the COMEX right now, and are the largest single holder of physical silver probably in the world when you take in consideration that they are also the custodian of the silver ETF SLV, which also I think, combined between these two entities, way over 500 million ounces. And I've heard estimates as much as, even higher than that. So I think that this is a huge story to say, hey, these guys didn't get to where they were by being stupid. They, I'm sure, felt the pressure of all of us saying, hey, buy physical silver because the paper silver markets can't hold it. And now they're positioning themselves to be on the rise when it does eventually go up, because there is a market, there is a reality that has set in. It is a vital, strategic, rare commodity that's being priced into oblivion. And I think if I was diabolical enough and I was JP Morgan, I would have switched over all those paper short positions to all these other banks out there and had physical silver waiting for that, and then, blow up the market. And I think that's, one other factor, one other storyline that I constantly keep track of on my YouTube channel, The Greatest Truth Never Told.
That is extraordinary. I think most people don't, well, I'm sure most people don't realize that the king of silver is actually JP Morgan.
Yeah. And it makes sense. I mean, and then I also did another video just this past week talking about how JP Morgan has 50,000 technologists, I think they call them. So, computer programmers and engineers. And that's more than double the amount of total employees that Facebook has. So, I mean, these guys are literally building some sort of, and they're invested with their own blockchain. So I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility that they're stacking physical silver, that they have blockchain, technology and stuff, that they could just use blockchain as a digital receipt for all this silver and remonetize it and introduce it into the economy when the fiat dollar dies. It's not out of the realm of possibility.
So you think they're creating their own cryptocurrency to be backed by silver?
They could. It would make sense. Why else would they be stacking so much physical silver? Why else are they investing so much in AI, blockchain? I think their blockchain's called Zcash or Quorum or something along those lines. I just read the article yesterday. These whole things line up in the face of a global generational debt-based fiat Ponzi scheme that they know it's not sustainable. It's not.
Wow.
For the little guy, we can't, go create our own banking system and stuff, but we surely can, be our own central bank. We surely can, save in our own silver standard. We surely can take our digital illusions of wealth and transfer it into real tangible wealth and start measuring our wealth in real things like calories, ounces, tools, friends, skills. These are the things that I try to, talk about on my channel, The Greatest Truth Never Told.
Chris, it is always amazing to have you on this show. Please talk to us about Silver Shield, your products, your articles, and where everyone can go to keep up with your commentary.
Probably the best place to start with is The Greatest Truth Never Told on YouTube. I think we got like 157,000 subscribers now. I've been on since 2011. Pretty much everything is revolved around silver because I think silver is one of these things that it meets so many different demands, historically, economically, spiritually, medically, technologically. It is literally entwined in the human story. And I think that the more people appreciate and understand how important it is, how vital it is, the technology that's coming with it, its uses. It's the second most versatile commodity in the world next to oil. And yet we treat it like it's this disposable metal, and it's very rare, and it's a great thing. So you can go over to The Greatest Truth Never Told on YouTube. The silver that I produce, every week I come out with a new mini mintage design that's available for 1 week only. Comes with a certificate of authenticity and sells for as little as $2 over spot at goldenstatemint.com. I have a lot of different offerings over there to meet different needs and objectives of what people are trying to do.
Yeah, it's just amazing. Just silver being not wanted is almost makes it prime to jump, right?
Yes. Yeah, that's when everybody wants to get in at the bottom, but nobody ever does. The grand majority of people would rather be wrong in a group than be right outside by themselves. I don't have that problem. I enjoy, in fact, I almost encourage myself to be like, if everybody's starting to talk about it, that's when I need to take pause. And unfortunately, human nature and instinct, they always fall into these bubbles and think everything's going to be okay, everything's going to be okay. And then guess what? It's not. And everybody's wrong at the same time. And then they make TV movies about it and dramas and hope that there's going to be justice and vote this guy in. Vote. No, I'd rather not be in the drama. I'd rather be safe and secure. I'd rather be right by myself and wait than, trying to play along and trying to beat everybody else in a game that nobody ends up winning.
Chris, thank you so much for being on this show today. It's always amazing.
Thank you, Michelle. It was wonderful.
Mr. Chris Duane, creator of Silver Shield and the man behind the video series, The Greatest Truth Never Told. For the Industry Experts Panel, I'm Michelle Holliday at PortfolioWealthGlobal.com.
Vortex breaking down how the end of the crypto bear market will catapult Bitcoin to new, fresh, all-time highs. Jim Rogers outlines exactly how the crash will happen. Charles Nenner on major stock market crashes and gold crashes. Rob Kirby sounding the alarm and reveals the 21 trillion missing dollars conspiracy. Portfolio Wealth Global continues to pound the table that this bull market is not over in stocks. In fact, Starbucks, our latest stock profile, jumped from $51 to over $63 in no time as it opens a new China branch every 15 hours. Make sure to subscribe to the newsletter as we reveal our picks for 2019.